I knew I was right where I was supposed to be. And we loved that car. We prayed over it. We anointed it with oil about a quart a week. And we drove that car until we could do something else. So he said, get out of debt. Second thing he said to me was, don't manipulate. It's amazing how many people manipulate. Maybe I'll just drop a hint that my electric bill's behind. Maybe I'll just drop a hint to somebody and maybe God will use that. Well, how will you know if you dropped a hint whether it was God or your hint? We do a lot of manipulation. Well, I was actually, at this time in my life, I was traveling and preaching revivals in churches. And when I would travel and preach a revival, they would give us a love offering. Some churches gave us like offerings. Some gave don't like offerings, don't come back offerings. But anyway, our whole income came from that. And it was normal to say, when the pastor would call and say, you know, what's your requirement for coming? You'd say, I want you to pay my expenses and give me a love offering. That was normal. But some of them would actually say, and it has to be this much, it has to be a minimum. I never did that even. But even then, God said to me, I don't want you to say that anymore. From now on, you say, I have no financial requirements. You trust me. So pastors would call and they'd say, okay, I'd like you to come to a revival. Can you do it? Yes, I can come the second week, no, the third, work it out. And then they'd say, what are your financial requirements? I'd say, I have no financial requirements. And some pastors, they just couldn't get it. They say, well, we need to give you a love offering, don't we? I'd say, no. No, you don't. They say, well, we need to pay your expenses. I'd say, no. No, you don't need to pay. And this one guy said, well, how will you live? He said, if we don't give you a love offering and at least pay your gas, I mean, how will you live? And I said something, and I meant it in a good way, but it came out kind of wrong. I said, listen, if I come to your church and I preach and you don't give me an offering, I said, God will take care of me and he'll take care of you. He said, well, we'll give you an offering. I said, no, that's not what I meant. And I really didn't mean it that way. What I meant was, God will provide for me and he'll provide for you. And that's really what I meant. And then the third thing the Lord said was, you begin to give. Get out of debt, don't manipulate, and you start giving. I said, well, God, I am giving. I give 10%. He said, no, that's not giving. That's returning. Let me say that again. That's not giving, that's returning. The Bible uses the word bring when it talks about tithing, not giving. Because you don't give what doesn't belong to you, you can bring it. It's in your house, and you just bring it to the house of God. But you're not really giving until you give over and above that. So he said, you begin giving. So we started giving over and above. And then the Lord began to really challenge us in giving. And here's how it happened. I went to speak at a church, and there were about 60 people there. It was on a Sunday night. It was the only meeting I had for the whole month. I had one meeting for the whole month. It wasn't even a week-long revival. It was one Sunday night, 60 people. And I said, you know, I have no financial requirements coming. And the pastor, they did a love offering that night. Pastor came to me afterwards, and he said, look at this, look. He was so excited. He said, look, he said, we've never done anything like this in our lives. It's incredible. And he showed me the amount, and the amount was enough for the whole month. And I thought, Lord, you're so good. Well, wait, that's not the end of the story. So I thought, Lord, you're just so good. And I'm thanking the Lord for it. And the pastor's talking to me, and I look over his shoulder. In the back of the church is a missionary that had spoken right before I spoke. And this little voice said to me, give him the love offering. And I remember exactly what I thought. I thought, I rebuke you, Satan. That's not God. That's not God. Lord, you provided this for me. This is, you know, I have one meeting this month. This is exactly what we need for the whole month. And this little voice kept saying, give him the love offering. You've heard that voice, haven't you? And what we said, la, 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 you know, we just. And I remember in my mind, I'm talking to God, you know, while this pastor told me, and I remember saying to the Lord, God, you're not thinking clearly. And the Lord said, give him the love offering, give him. So I did. I took the love offering, I folded it in half, I endorsed it, I folded it in half, I went up to him, I said, I'm going to give you something, 2 conditions. Number 1, you don't look at it until after you leave. Number 2, you never tell anyone that I did this. Never. Here's the reason God had dealt with me about manipulation. So I didn't want to tell anyone I'd done this, you understand? So anyway, so I gave him the love offering. That night, we go out to eat at a pizza place, and there were 6 couples, including Debbie and me, from the church, all right? There were 6 guys at one end of the table. The lady sat at the other end. They started talking. We're talking. These 4 guys got into some conversation. This guy across the table from me leans across the table like this. And so I kind of lean into, I don't know why we're leaning, but I'm leaning. And then he says to me, how much was the love offering? Just like that. And so I told him. I just told him the amount. And then he said, where's the check? And I know I shouldn't have lied, but I really did not want anyone to know what I'd done. You understand what I'm saying? I didn't want him to know. And I was kind of on the spot. I thought, who's this guy? I don't even know him. He's asking me, you know. And so I couldn't think. And I said, Debbie has it. And then he said, go get it. I want to see it. So I said, okay. So I got up and I walked down to the other end of the table where Debbie was, and I leaned down and I said, how's your pizza? Good? Okay. All right. There's nothing else to say. You know, there's no check. So I went back and I leaned across the table. These guys are still talking. And I said, and I know I shouldn't have said this, but I didn't want anyone to know what I'd done. I wanted it to be between God and me. But I leaned and I said, it's in the car. And he said, it's not in the car. So I said, where is it? I mean, you know so much, you know. So. And he said, you gave it away, didn't you? And I said, yes. How did you know that? He said, because God told me. And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out a check that was already made out, that he had made out before he came to church that night, to our ministry. And he opened it up and he held it out like this. And it was exactly 10 times the amount of the check I just given away. Exactly. And he held it out like this, and he's holding the top of the check, and I reached down and I took the bottom of the check, but he wouldn't let it go. And so I looked across the top of the check into his eyes. He's holding the top, I'm holding the bottom, and he said to me, God's about to teach you about giving so you can teach the body of Christ. And he let the check go. And God started teaching us about giving extravagantly. And we started giving extravagantly when God spoke. And every time we'd give, something like that would happen, and no one would know. And with that car, we bought another car. God said, give that car away. We gave that car away, and then this guy gave us a $25,000 van. And then we gave that away, and then we gave this. And in 18 months, we gave 9 cars away to people. Wow. We just started giving when God spoke. If God said it, we were going to do it. And I remember one time God said to me, he said, I want you to sell your car. And I remember, you know, you can get prideful in your gift even. And I said, well, God, I don't sell cars. I give them away. He said, no, you obey. That's what you do. You do what I tell you to. I said, well, okay, Lord, how much you want me to sell it for? He said, $12,000. I said, okay, this is Saturday. Sunday, this guy walks up to me in church like this, says, hey, you want to sell your car? I said, yeah, I do. He said, $12,000? Yeah. He gives me a check right there for $12,000. Took my car. Bought my car that day. The next day, we get on a plane. We go to Costa Rica to do a mission trip. The missionary picks us up at the airport. We're driving along, old rickety van. I don't know if any of you ever been to, you know, third world country. You know, yeah, you know, I'm driving along like this, missionary, you know. I say to the guy, why don't you get you a new van? He says, I'm about to. He said, I was driving by this car lot last week. God told me to stop. Went over, showed me a van. He said, I'm going to give you that van. I said, how much is it? You want to take a guess? He said, $12,000. I said, turn around. Let's go get the van. Listen, this is the most fun you can have. I'm not special. You can live this way. You can give. When God tells you give, you can give. When God told us not to manipulate, quit manipulating. The very first meeting we went to, we're driving up to Oklahoma to preach in the church. I pulled into the gas station to fill the cart with gas. I went in to pay for it, and the lady said to me behind the counter, it's taken care of. I said, why is it taken care of? She said, because when you pulled in, God told me you were an evangelist and I was to fill your car up with gas. And I went out and I got my car. I said, God, I sure like doing it better your way than my way. Yeah. And for 25 years now, I've been living this life. And when God says give, I had a guy that found out lost his job. And the Lord spoke to me and said, and I knew, he said, I made $3,000 a month. And the Lord said to me, he's going to get a new job in 1 month. I thought, that's great. He said, I want you to tell him that. I thought, that's great. So I go to tell him, the Lord said, but for this month, I want you to pay his salary. I said, Lord, that's $3,000. He said, no, his new job is going to make $4,000 a month. I want you to pay him $4,000.